At 1,047 hours, 25,000 feet over Germany, Staff Sergeant Frank Petrovich watched 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds form up 2,000 yards out through the scratched plexiglass of his ball turret. The air inside the turret smelled like gun oil and hydraulic fluid mixed with his own sweat, despite the -40-degree cold at altitude. His breath fogged the oxygen mask. Ice crystals formed on the metal frame inches from his face. The ball turret was a steel sphere suspended beneath the B-17F Lucky Strike, barely 4 feet in diameter. Petrovich sat cramped with his knees pulled to his chest, feet resting on rudder pedals that controlled the turret's rotation. 50 caliber Browning M. 2 machine guns protruded from the sphere like accusing fingers. His gloved hands rested on the firing controls. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips. The radio crackled in his headset. Captain Robert Hayes, pilot. Fighters, 12 o'clock high. Count 12 bandits. They're forming up. Technical Sergeant Frank Murphy from the top turret. They're gonna hit us hard, Skipper. Sergeant Eddie Rodriguez, left waist gunner. How's everybody on ammunition? Sergeant Carl Johnson, right waist. 500 rounds, standard load. Sergeant Robert Wilson, tail gunner. Same here. 500. Rodriguez keyed his mic again. Ball turret, how about you? Petrovich hesitated. Standard ball turret load was 500 rounds per gun, 1,000 rounds total, but hidden in modified ammunition boxes beneath him were 800 rounds per gun, 1,600 rounds total. 600 rounds he'd stolen 3 days ago from the armory. 600 rounds that violated every regulation in the 8th Air Force Gunnery Manual. 600 rounds that could get him court-martialed, or save his crew. 500 per gun, Petrovich lied. Standard load. The German fighters began their approach. Petrovich's hand tightened on the firing controls. His index finger rested on the trigger. The ME 109 seconds were closing at 400 miles per hour combined speed. Doctrine said wait until 400 yards, wait until you could see the rivets on their wings, wait until every round mattered. But Petrovich had watched Doctrine kill better men than him, had watched it kill his friends, had watched ammunition conservation become a death sentence. The lead ME 109 was at 1,800 yards now, closing fast. Petrovich was about to do something that violated every page of the gunnery manual, something that could get him court-martialed or save his crew. His finger moved to the trigger. The doctrine was clear. Every gunner in the 8th Air Force learned it in training, memorized it like gospel. Ammunition discipline is survival discipline. Standard ball turret load. 500 rounds per gun. 2 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. 1,000 rounds total. Rate of fire, 750 to 850 rounds per minute per gun. Simple mathematics told the brutal truth. 500 rounds at 800 rounds per minute equals 37 seconds of sustained fire. Not even 40 seconds before your guns went silent. The official doctrine was written in 8th Air Force Tactical Manual 43-2, Distribution of Defensive Fire, published April 1942. Wait until 400-yard range before engaging. Fire-controlled 2 to 3 second bursts. 40 to 50 rounds per burst. Conserve ammunition for multiple engagements. Make every round count. The reasoning seemed sound. A bomber mission over Germany lasted 6 to 8 hours from takeoff to landing. During that time, a B-17 could face 8 to 14 separate fighter attacks. If gunners fired at every attack, they'd be dry within 30 minutes. Then what? 300 miles of German airspace with empty guns, easy prey for any Luftwaffe pilot smart enough to wait. German pilots knew this doctrine. They'd captured enough American gunners, interrogated enough prisoners, studied enough wreckage. They understood the mathematics as well as the Americans did. Better, maybe. Because they figured out how to exploit it. The tactic was elegant and brutal. German fighters would make false attack runs at 800 yards, come in fast and aggressive. American gunners, seeing fighters closing, would open fire, burn through 50-60 rounds. The German fighters would break off at 600 yards, not close enough to hit the bomber, but close enough to provoke defensive fire, do it twice, 3 times. By the 4th run, American gunners had expended 200 rounds on targets that were never going to press home their attacks. Gunners would be rationing their remaining ammunition, making hard choices about which threats to engage. That's when the real attack came. When gunners were low on ammunition and making calculations about whether they could afford another burst, German fighters pressed to 200 yards. Point-blank range. American gunners with 100 rounds left had to choose: fire now and be dry for the next attack, or hold fire and hope the fighter misses. It was a death sentence wrapped in doctrine. Between August and September 1943, the 8th Air Force lost 176 heavy bombers over Germany. Analysis showed that 43% of those bombers had ceased defensive fire in one or more gun positions before being shot down. Gunners had followed doctrine, conserved ammunition, made every round count, and died anyway. The tactical manual was clear on this point. Ammunition discipline is survival discipline. The gunner who wastes ammunition on low-probability targets will find himself defenseless when facing committed attacks. Conservation equals survival. But Staff Sergeant Frank Petrovich had learned something the manual didn't teach. Sometimes conservation equaled death. Sometimes following the rules got you killed. Sometimes you had to choose between regulations and reality. 3 days before the Schweinfurt mission, Staff Sergeant Frank Petrovich found himself on extra duty in the base armory. Minor infraction. He'd missed morning formation because he'd been working on his ball turret until 0200 hours. Captain Hayes understood, but regulations were regulations. Punishment. 8 hours infantry duty in the armory under Sergeant Bill Henderson. Henderson was 52 years old, career NCO, 26 years in the Army. Started as a private in 1917, worked his way up through peacetime promotions. He knew every regulation, every form, every supply procedure. But Henderson also knew when to look the other way. He'd seen too many young men die to care much about minor rule violations. The armory smelled like gun oil and cardboard, shelves lined with wooden crates, 50 caliber ammunition, 30 caliber, 20mm cannon shells for the British Spitfires that occasionally landed at Ridgewell. Petrovich spent the first 2 hours counting crates, checking inventory numbers against Henderson's logbook. Tedious work, exactly the kind of punishment designed to teach patience. At 1,430 hours, Petrovich noticed something. 4 wooden crates stacked in the corner. Each crate marked 2050 calories, M2, 1000 RDS. He checked Henderson's logbook. Delivery manifest dated October 8th. Shipment for a mission to Bremen scheduled for October 9th. The mission had been scrubbed due to weather. Low ceiling, heavy clouds over the North Sea. Bombers couldn't form up properly. The ammunition had been logged in, 4,000 rounds, but it had never been distributed. Never loaded onto aircraft, never signed out, just sitting in the corner of the armory, a logistics snafu. Henderson saw Petrovich looking at the crates. Nobody's asking for them, Henderson said. Nobody's tracking them, supposed to go back to depot, but paperwork hasn't come through yet. Might sit here another week before somebody remembers they exist. Petrovich stared at those crates. His mind started calculating. Standard ball turret load, 500 rounds per gun, 2 guns, 1,000 rounds total. At 800 rounds per minute, that gave him roughly 75 seconds of actual firing time. But doctrine said fire in 2 to 3 second bursts. 20 bursts, maximum before going dry. What if he took 300 extra rounds per gun? That would give him 800 rounds per gun, 1,600 total. That's 120 seconds of firing time, or 60 bursts. Triple his combat endurance. Or looked at another way, 24 extra seconds of sustained fire to intimidate German fighters. Make them think his guns never stopped. Make them think twice about pressing attacks. The weight was manageable. 600 extra rounds. 50 caliber rounds weighed roughly 4 pounds each, including links. 600 rounds equals 240 pounds. Split into 4 ammunition cans. 60 pounds per can. Heavy, but movable. Henderson stepped outside at 1,500 hours for his afternoon coffee break. 15 minutes? He always took exactly 15 minutes. Petrovich knew this because he'd been watching Henderson's patterns for weeks. Calculator. That's what the other gunners called him. He counted everything. Petrovich worked fast. Opened 2 crates with a pry bar. The wood splintered. He grabbed 4 empty ammunition cans from the shelf. Filled each can with 150 rounds, 600 rounds total. The cans were heavy. His hands shook as he carried them 2 at a time to the maintenance hangar 50 yards away, hid them under a canvas tarp behind a workbench, came back, closed the crates, swept up the wood splinters. Henderson returned at 1,515 hours, looked around the armory, looked at Petrovich, looked at the crates in the corner, said nothing, went back to his desk. Petrovich's hands were shaking. Not from fear, from possibility, from the realization that he'd just stolen 600 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. Court-martial offense. Unauthorized acquisition of military property. 5 years in Leavenworth if they caught him. But those 600 rounds might save 9 lives. Simple mathematics. 9 lives versus 5 years in prison. Petrovich knew which he'd choose. Getting 600 extra rounds into a ball turret designed for 1,000 rounds presented engineering challenges. The Sperry ball turret was exactly 44 inches in diameter. Every inch of space was accounted for. 2. 50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. 2 ammunition boxes, 250 rounds each per gun. Hydraulic rotation motors, electrical systems, gun sight, oxygen supply, and 1 human being crammed into the center of it all. Standard ammunition boxes were rectangular metal containers welded to the turret frame. Each box held 250 rounds in a continuous belt. The ammunition fed through chutes into the receivers. The system was designed for reliability, not capacity. Adding 300 rounds per gun meant either finding bigger boxes or changing how ammunition was stored. Night of October 12th. 2,300 hours. The maintenance hangar was nearly empty. Most ground crew had finished their shifts. Night crew chief was Corporal Jimmy Reeves, 23 years old, from Alabama. Good kid, competent mechanic. More importantly, he owed Petrovich a favor. Back in July, Reeves had fallen asleep during a night shift. Petrovich had covered for him, told the duty officer that Reeves was in the latrine when the officer came through on inspection. Petrovich found Reeves working on an engine cowling. "Jimmy, I need 20 minutes in the ball turret." "Alone." Reeves looked at him. "What are you doing?" "Better if you don't know." "Is this going to get me in trouble?" "Only if you see me doing it." Reeves thought about this for maybe 5 seconds. "I'm going to the mess hall. Heard they've got fresh coffee tonight. Might take me 30 minutes to drink it. 20's enough. 30's safer." Reeves walked out. Petrovich went to work. He'd already modified the ammunition boxes. Yesterday afternoon, in the metalworking shop, he'd fabricated deeper boxes using scrap aluminum from a damaged B-17. Each new box held 400 rounds instead of 250. The modification required removing some internal spacing panels from the turret. Non-critical structure, just metal dividers that kept ammunition boxes from rattling. Petrovich had calculated the stress loads. The turret frame could handle the extra 90 pounds. Barely. He crawled into the ball turret from above. Tight fit, always was. Removed the standard ammunition boxes, unbolted them from their mounts. 4 bolts per box. His hands worked fast. Installed the modified boxes. They fit, but just barely. Required forcing them into position. The extra depth meant they protruded slightly into the turret's rotation space. That would slow turret movement by about 8%. Petrovich had tested this yesterday with empty boxes. The hydraulic motors could handle it. The ammunition feed chutes needed modification too. The standard chutes were too short for the deeper boxes. Petrovich had fabricated extensions using surplus belt links. Crude work, but functional. The ammunition would feed properly. Probably. He wouldn't know for certain until he fired the guns in combat. Total capacity now, 800 rounds per gun. 1,600 total. Added. Weight, 90 pounds. If inspectors checked carefully during pre-flight, they'd notice immediately. The modified boxes looked different, sat at a different angle, but inspectors rarely checked ball turrets carefully. Too cramped, too difficult to access. They'd glance, see guns and ammunition boxes, sign off. October 13th, 1,500 hours. Pre-flight inspection. Lieutenant Charles Hadley, aircraft inspector, worked his way around Lucky Strike. Checked engines, control surfaces, bomb bay doors, walked underneath the fuselage, glanced up at the ball turret. Petrovich watched from 50 feet away, trying to look casual. His heart hammered. Hadley looked at the turret for maybe 3 seconds, moved on, checked the tail section, signed his inspection form. Aircraft ready for combat operations. Petrovich exhaled. The modification was invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. He'd just violated regulations, altered aircraft armament without authorization, and gotten away with it. Now he just had to hope it worked. The briefing room at Ridgewell was packed with aircrew. Pilots, co-pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, 300 men who would fly into Germany in 6 hours. Some of them would not return. Everyone knew this. The question was, which ones? Group Commander Colonel Harry Wilson stood at the front of the room. Behind him, a large map of Europe covered the wall. Red string marked the route. England to Belgium to Germany. Deep into Germany. The string stopped at a city marked Schweinfurt. "Gentlemen," Wilson began, "this is the most important mission of the war. We're going to destroy Germany's ability to produce ball bearings. Without ball bearings, their tanks stop, their aircraft stop, the war stops." He paused. Let that sink in. Target is the Kugelfischer ball bearing plant at Schweinfurt, 560 miles round trip. Expected fighter opposition, heavy, very heavy. Intelligence estimates 150 to 200 German fighters. You'll have P-47 escort to the German border. After that, you're on your own. 200 miles into Germany without fighter protection. 200 miles back. Wilson looked at the faces in front of him. Young men, most under 25, some on their first mission, some on their 20th. All of them understanding what he wasn't saying. Expected losses are significant. Significant. That was the word they used. Not catastrophic. Not devastating. Significant. The word was chosen carefully. Meant 10 to 15% casualties. Meant 30 bombers wouldn't come home. Meant 270 men. The cost will be high. Wilson continued. But the reward is victory. Destroy this plant and we cut Germany's war production in half. Every ball bearing for every tank, every aircraft, every piece of machinery comes through Schweinfurt. We take it out, we win the war faster. We save lives in the long run. Silence in the briefing room, men processing this, calculating their odds, wondering if they'd be part of the 10% or the 90%. Lucky Strike's crew sat together. Captain Robert Hayes, 26, from Ohio. Lieutenant James Mitchell, 23, Texas. Lieutenant Thomas Bailey, 25, California. Lieutenant William Chen, 24, New York. Technical Sergeant Frank Murphy, 28, Massachusetts. Staff Sergeant David Morrison, 22, Michigan. Sergeant Eddie Rodriguez, left waist. Sergeant Carl Johnson, right waist. Sergeant Robert Wilson, 21, Georgia, tail gunner. And Staff Sergeant Frank Petrovich, 24, Pennsylvania, ball turret. Petrovich sat in the back row. Said nothing about his modification. Didn't tell his crew about the extra 600 rounds hidden in his turret. If it worked, they'd find out. If it didn't work, they'd be too dead to care. Simple mathematics. Better to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when permission would never come. At 0630 hours, Lucky Strike's 4, right R, 1,820 Cyclone engines coughed to life. Each engine produced 1,200 horsepower. The sound was thunder, the kind of thunder that shook bones and rattled teeth. Ground crew pulled wheel chocks, Hayes advanced throttles. The bomber rolled toward runway 24. Loaded weight, 65,000 pounds, 6,000 pounds of bombs in the bay. Full fuel load, 2,780 gallons, ammunition for 10 defensive gun positions, and Petrovich's extra 600 rounds that shouldn't exist. At 0647 hours, Hayes pushed throttles to maximum. Lucky Strike accelerated down the runway, tail lifted at 60 miles per hour, main wheels left concrete at 90. The bomber climbed into grey English morning sky. Behind them, 29 more B-17 seconds from the 381st Bomb Group followed at 30-second intervals. Formation assembly took 90 minutes. 291 B-17 seconds circling over East Anglia. 3 combat wings, High Squadron, Middle Squadron, Low Squadron. Lucky Strike flew in the Low Squadron. Purple Heart, corner, the position most vulnerable to fighter attack. First target for German fighters diving from above. Lowest position in formation meant limited support from other bombers' guns. Hayes didn't complain. Somebody had to fly Purple Heart corner. Today it was Lucky Strike's turn. At 0903 hours, they crossed the English Channel. 60 P-47 Thunderbolts joined the formation. Fighter escort, beautiful aircraft, fast, heavily armed, but limited range. They could escort to the German border. Then their fuel would force them back. The bombers would continue alone. The channel was grey and cold. Whitecaps visible 12,000 feet below. Petrovich watched from his ball turret. He'd entered the turret over the channel, climbed down through the fuselage, squeezed through the hatch, pulled his legs in, rotated the turret so the hatch faced up, closed it. Now he was suspended in a metal sphere beneath the bomber. 4 feet of diameter, minus 40 degrees at 25,000 feet. Oxygen mask feeding thin, air. No parachute. No room for one. If the bomber went down, he'd have to climb back into the fuselage before he could bail out. Hope he had time. Hope the bomber didn't explode first. At 0947 hours, they crossed the German border. The P-47 seconds waggled their wings, turned back toward England. Radio crackled. "Good luck, boys. See you on the way back." Now the bombers were alone. 200 miles to target. 200 miles back. 400 miles of German airspace without fighter protection. 400 miles where Luftwaffe fighters could attack at will. At 1015 hours, the first German fighters appeared. ME 109 seconds. Approximately 30 aircraft. They formed up at 12 o'clock high. 3,000 yards out. Far enough to be safe from defensive fire. Close enough to study the American formation. Looking for weaknesses. Hayes's voice crackled over the intercom. Fighters 12 o'clock high. Multiple bandits. Murphy from the top turret, count 30 plus. They're forming up for coordinated attack. Wilson from the tail. More coming from 6 o'clock. Jesus, they're everywhere. Petrovich rotated his turret. Scanned the sky below the bomber. Grey clouds 10,000 feet below. Empty air between bomber and clouds. That's where fighters would come from. 6 o'clock low. Diving attacks from below and behind. His hands rested on the firing controls. 1,600 rounds ready. Standard doctrine said wait until 400 yards. Conserve ammunition. Make every round count. Petrovich had a different plan. He was going to open fire at 1,200 yards, going to fire continuously, going to make German pilots think his guns never ran dry, going to intimidate them before they got close enough to hurt his bomber. It would work. Or he'd be court-martialed. Or dead. Probably dead. The German fighters broke formation, started their approach. 6 ME 109 seconds broke from the main formation at 1,018 hours. Diving attack from 6 o'clock high, standard Luftwaffe tactic. Attack from the sun. High-speed dive. Hit hard and fast. The target was Lucky Strike and 2 other bombers in the low squadron. Purple Heart Corner, always the first target. Initial distance, 2,000 yards. The Me-109 seconds dove through thin air. Combined closing speed, 400 miles per hour. German fighters at 300 miles per hour. American bombers at 180 miles per hour. Angles and velocities converging. Time to weapons range, 18 seconds. Every gunner in Lucky Strike watched, waited. Standard response was clear. Wait until 400 yards. Open fire with controlled bursts, 2 3-second bursts. Conserve ammunition for multiple attacks. This was doctrine. This was training. This was how every gunner in the 8th Air Force fought. Petrovich watched the Me-109 seconds through his gun sight. Watched them grow from small dots to recognizable aircraft. Watched them commit to their attack run. At 1,200 yards, most gunners would still be waiting, watching, calculating range, deciding when to fire. At 1,200 yards, Petrovich opened fire. Sustained burst, not controlled. Both. 50 caliber Brownings hammering. The sound was deafening even through his leather helmet. The turret vibrated. Shell casings ejected from the guns. Tracers arced through the sky. Every 5th round was tracer. Petrovich could watch his fire reach toward the German fighters. 80 rounds in 12 seconds. No hits. The range was too great. The fighters were too far away. But hitting them wasn't the point. The psychological impact was immediate. The lead Me-109 broke left. Hard turn. Emergency maneuver. His wingman followed. The 4 other fighters scattered. The attack formation disintegrated before it developed. No coordinated attack. No disciplined approach. Just 6 fighters breaking in 6 different directions. Self-preservation overriding tactics. No shots fired at Lucky Strike. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom from the left waist position. "Ball turret, what the hell are you doing? You're wasting ammunition." Petrovich didn't respond. He kept scanning for the next threat. Rotated his turret. Searched the sky. The German fighters were regrouping at 2,500 yards. They'd try again, probably angrier this time. Definitely more cautious. Hayes's voice. "Petrovich, Rodriguez is right. Conserve your ammo. You'll be dry before we reach target." Petrovich clicked his mic twice. Acknowledgement. He'd heard the order, but he wasn't going to follow it. He'd watched ammunition conservation kill better men than him. Watched it kill Eddie Morrison and Carl Weber over Regensburg. Watched doctrine become a death sentence. The German fighters formed up again, started another approach. Petrovich's finger rested on the trigger. 1,600 rounds ready. 1,520 remaining after that first burst. Plenty more where that came from. Let them come. Frank Petrovich was 24 years old, born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, South Side, where the steel mills turned the sky orange at night and the air tasted like metal. His father worked blast furnaces at Jones and Laughlin Steel. Frank started working the mills at 16, summer jobs that became full-time after high school. Hot, brutal work. 12-hour shifts pouring molten steel. Made a man strong or killed him trying. Frank boxed amateur lightweight division at the Polish-American Club on Saturday nights. 43 fights, 31 wins, 12 losses. Not great, not terrible. Good enough to earn respect. The boxing taught him something useful. Watch your opponent's patterns. See what they do before they do it. Anticipate. React faster than they expect. March 1942. Frank enlisted. Army Air Forces. His father thought he was crazy. You want to fly in airplanes? Get shot at by Germans? Stay in the mill. Safe work. But Frank had seen the newsreels from Europe, seen the bombers over Germany. Thought maybe he could make a difference. Gunnery School at Harlingen, Texas, December 1942, graduated middle of his class. Not because he was a bad shot, he was excellent, but because he asked too many questions. Instructors didn't like questions, they liked soldiers who followed orders. February 1943, assigned to 381st Bomb Group, Ridgewell, England. By October, 19 combat missions. 2 confirmed kills, 3 probables. The numbers didn't matter much to Frank. What mattered was coming home. Watching his crewmates come home. Frank was 5'8", 140 pounds. Perfect size for ball turret duty. Bigger men couldn't fit in the cramped sphere. Smaller men got tossed around by recoil. Frank fit exactly right. His hands were scarred from mill work, steady under pressure. Never shook, even when fighters dove at him with guns blazing. The other gunners called him calculator because he counted everything, counted rounds fired, counted enemy fighters, counted how many times specific German pilots used specific tactics. Frank saw patterns others missed, watched how ME 109 seconds approached differently than FW 190 seconds, noticed how veteran German pilots attacked versus newer ones. Most soldiers did what they were told, followed doctrine, trusted that regulations existed for good reasons. Frank respected doctrine, but he didn't worship it. When regulations conflicted with reality, when the manual said one thing but combat showed another, Frank chose reality. That made him different, made him dangerous to the status quo, made him exactly the kind of soldier who could change how wars were fought, but it also made him the kind of soldier who could get court-martialed for stealing ammunition. Frank didn't care much about that. He cared about his crew, cared about getting them home. If breaking regulations kept 9 men alive, Frank would break regulations. Simple math. 9 lives versus 1 court-martial. Easy choice. The 17th of August, 1943. The Schweinfurt Regensburg mission. The bloodiest day for the 8th Air Force to date. 291 bombers attacking 2 targets simultaneously. Schweinfurt ball bearing, the plants. Regensburg Messerschmitt factory. Split German defences. Or that was the theory. Petrovich's previous crew flew B-17F Iron Annie with the 91st Bomb Group. The Regensburg mission was supposed to be his 14th. 230 miles into Germany. No fighter escort. The P-47 Thunderbolts didn't have the range. Bombers would be alone over German airspace for 400 miles round trip. First fighter contact came at 1034 hours. 40 Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds. The Germans attacked in waves. Standard Luftwaffe tactic. Overwhelm defensive fire with numbers. But these attacks were different. The ME 109 seconds came in at 800 yards. Fast and aggressive. Waist gunners Sergeant Eddie Morrison and Sergeant Carl Weber opened fire. Morrison called over the intercom, "Got one! No, he's breaking off!" Weber, "Bastards are playing with us." They were. The ME 109 seconds broke off at 600 yards, didn't press home their attacks, just provoked defensive fire and disappeared. Morrison and Weber burned through. 80 rounds combined. The fighters came back. Same tactic. Morrison and Weber fired again. Another 70 rounds. The fighters broke off. Third run. Morrison and Weber fired. 60 rounds. The fighters left. 8 minutes. 3 attack runs. Morrison and Weber had expended 210 rounds each. More than 350 rounds combined. On targets that never closed to effective firing range. Then the real attack came. 1,042 hours. 4th wave. 6 ME 109 seconds dove from 12,000 feet. Committed attack, came in at 600 yards and kept coming. Morrison squeezed his trigger. Nothing. Empty. He'd burned through 500 rounds on false targets. Weber had maybe 30 rounds remaining. He fired. His guns went silent after 4 seconds. No defensive fire from the waist positions. 20mm cannon fire ripped through Iron Annie. The pilot died instantly. 20mm round through the cockpit. Co-pilot wounded. Tried to keep the bomber flying. Navigator killed. Bombardier wounded. The bomber shuddered. Fell out of formation. 3 Me 109 seconds finished it. Iron Annie went down trailing black smoke over Bavaria. Petrovich's ball turret severed during the attack. The mounting bolts sheared under stress. The entire turret fell away from the fuselage. Petrovich fell 18,000 feet inside a steel ball, waiting until 8,000 feet to blow the hatch and deploy his parachute. Landed near a Wehrmacht patrol. Captured. Spent 6 hours as a prisoner before American armor liberated the area. Returned to England August 23rd. Assigned to new crew. New bomber, B-17F Lucky Strike. The lesson was burned into Petrovich's memory. Ammunition conservation got his friends killed. Doctrine was a death sentence, and he wasn't going to die following rules written by people who'd never faced a Messerschmitt at 25,000 feet. The second attack wave came at 1,024 hours, 8 FW 190 seconds from 3 o'clock level. Wide-nosed fighters, more heavily armed than ME 109 seconds, 4 20mm cannons, 2 13mm machine guns, brutal firepower. They approached in a loose line formation. Petrovich couldn't engage. Ball turret coverage was limited to the lower hemisphere. He could fire at fighters attacking from below and behind, but level attacks from the side belonged to the waist gunners. Rodriguez and Johnson opened fire at 500 yards. Standard doctrine. Controlled bursts. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. The FW 190 seconds kept coming. Pressed their attack to 300 yards. Close enough to see cockpit details. Close enough to kill. 20mm cannon fire hammered Lucky Strike's right wing. The sound was metal tearing. Explosive rounds punched through aluminum skin. The fuel transfer system took damage. Warning lights flashed on Hayes's instrument panel. The right-wing tank wasn't feeding properly. Not catastrophic, but concerning. They'd need that fuel for the flight home. The bomber next to Lucky Strike wasn't as fortunate. B-17F Hell's Angel took multiple cannon hits in the fuselage. The No. 3 engine exploded in orange, flame. The bomber shuddered, fell out of formation. Petrovich watched it drop away. Counted 3 parachutes. 6 men didn't make it out. The bomber spiraled toward the ground, trailing black smoke. Rodriguez over the intercom. Hell's Angel is going down. Jesus Christ. Hayes, stay focused. More fighters coming. Third attack wave at 1,031 hours. 12 ME 109 seconds. Coordinated attack from multiple vectors. 4 from 6 o'clock low. 4 from 12 o'clock high. 4 from 3 o'clock level. Textbook Luftwaffe tactics. Overwhelm defensive fire. Force gunners to choose which threat to engage. Guarantee some fighters get through. Petrovich tracked the 4 ME 109 seconds attacking from 6 o'clock low. His sector. His responsibility. They were at 1,500 yards and closing fast. Standard response. Wait until 400 yards. Petrovich opened fire at 1,300 yards. Sustained burst. 100 rounds. 15 seconds of continuous fire. The sky filled with tracers. The lead fighter broke off at 900 yards. Second fighter broke at 800 yards. Third and fourth followed. Attack broken before they reached firing range. 0 hits on Lucky Strike from Petrovich's sector. But the other sectors told a different story. Murphy in the top turret engaged the high attack per doctrine. Opened fire at 500 yards. The ME 109 seconds pressed to 200 yards before breaking off. Multiple hits on the fuselage. The radio compartment took damage. Morrison, the radio operator, called out, "Radio's hit! We're off the air!" The waist gunners engaged the level attack at 400 yards. Standard procedure. The FW 190 seconds pressed to 250 yards. Johnson took shrapnel in his right shoulder, metal fragments from an exploding 20mm round. He grunted in pain but kept firing. Hayes noticed the pattern. Fighters attacking Petrovich's sector broke off early. Fighters attacking other sectors pressed close. The correlation was obvious. Murphy noticed it too. Even Rodriguez noticed it, though he didn't want to admit it. Hayes keyed the intercom. "All gunners, listen up. Ball turret's doing something different, and it's working. Petrovich, keep doing whatever you're doing. Everyone else, Take note. Murphy from the top turret. Captain, what exactly is ball turret doing? Hayes. He's firing earlier. A lot earlier. And the Krauts don't like it. Rodriguez. Sir, that's against doctrine. He's wasting ammunition. Hayes. Rodriguez. How many fighters got close to his sector? Silence for 3 seconds. None, sir. And how many got close to yours? Another pause. All of them, sir. Then maybe doctrine's wrong. The words hung in the air. Maybe doctrine's wrong. No pilot in the 8th Air Force said those words. Doctrine was written by experienced officers, tested in combat, refined over months of operations. Questioning doctrine was questioning the entire command structure. But Hayes had watched Hell's Angel go down 6 minutes ago, had watched Johnson take shrapnel, had felt his own aircraft shudder under cannon fire. Wasn't keeping them alive. Petrovich's violation of doctrine was. Hayes made his decision. All gunners, engage at maximum effective range, don't wait for 400 yards. Light them up at 1200 if you can. Make them think we've got unlimited ammunition. Murphy. Sir. We'll be dry before we reach target. Hayes. Maybe. Or maybe they'll stop pressing attacks. I'd rather be dry and alive than following doctrine and dead. The 4th attack wave came at 1038 hours. 15 fighters. Multiple vectors. The Germans had committed their reserves. They wanted Lucky Strike and the other bombers in Purple Heart Corner, wanted them badly. Every gun position on Lucky Strike opened fire at 1000 yards. Murphy from the top turret, Chen from the nose, Rodriguez and Johnson from the waist, Wilson from the tail, Petrovich from the ball turret, simultaneous fire from 6 positions. The sky around Lucky Strike filled with tracers. It looked like a solid wall of fire, a barrier of lead. The German fighters broke at 700 yards, reformed at 1,500 yards, tried again at 1,042 hours. Lucky Strike's gunners opened fire at 1,100 yards. The Germans broke at 800 yards, tried a third time at 1,045 hours. Gunners fired at 1,200 yards. The Germans gave up, moved to easier targets. Bombers whose gunners still followed doctrine. Between 1,035 and 1,047 hours, Lucky Strike took 0 hits. 4 bombers nearby took heavy damage. 2 went down. The difference was obvious. Lucky Strike's gunners never stopped firing, never let the Germans get close, burned through ammunition like water, but survived. At 1,047 hours, Lucky Strike reached the initial point, the spot where the bomb run began. From here, the bomber had to fly straight and level for 8 minutes. No evasive maneuvers. Any deviation would throw off the bombardier's aim. 8 minutes of predictable flight, 8 minutes of maximum vulnerability. Chen in the bombardier position. Bomb bay doors open. 4 minutes to target. The doors opened with a mechanical whine. Cold air rushed into the fuselage. The bomber's speed dropped slightly. Extra drag from the open bay. Hayes. All gunners, weapons free. Burn through your ammunition if you have to. Just keep them off us for 4 minutes. The German fighters knew this was their moment. Bombers during bomb runs couldn't maneuver. Sitting ducks, 60 Luftwaffe fighters concentrated on the bomber stream. They'd been waiting for this. Lucky Strike touched down at Ridgewell at 1,342 hours. All 4 engines still running. Hayes cut the throttles. The bomber rolled to its hard stand. Ground crew swarmed immediately. Started counting bullet holes. 11 hits. All non-critical. Right-wing fuel system damaged but operational. 3 20mm holes in the tail section. Waist position showed shrapnel damage where Johnson had been hit, but the aircraft was flyable, would be ready for the next mission after repairs. The 381st Bomb Group had sent 30 bombers to Schweinfurt. 27 came back. 3 were gone. 27 men didn't come home. 6 more bombers were damaged beyond repair, would be scrapped for parts. But Lucky Strike would fly again. At 1,500 hours, Intelligence Officer Captain Robert Anderson conducted the standard post-mission debriefing. Each crew was questioned separately. What they saw, what they hit, what hit them. Anderson was thorough. Asked the same questions 3 different ways to catch inconsistencies. Lucky Strike's crew sat in a small room, 9 men, all alive, all functional. Johnson's shoulder was bandaged. Medics said the shrapnel wounds were superficial. He'd fly again in a week. Anderson opened his notebook. Captain Hayes, describe your defensive engagement. Hayes explained their tactics. We engaged at maximum range, sustained fire, didn't wait for close range. The Germans broke off their attacks early. Anderson made notes. That's contrary to doctrine. Yes, sir. And it saved our aircraft. It described the pattern. Fighters attacking Petrovich's sector broke off at 800 to 1,000 yards. Fighters attacking sectors using standard doctrine pressed to 200 to 300 yards. The correlation was clear. Anderson turned to Rodriguez. Waist gunner, confirm Captain Hayes's statement. Rodriguez hesitated. He didn't want to admit that violating doctrine worked better than following it. But the evidence was undeniable. Confirmed, sir. We fired earlier, a lot earlier. The Germans broke off their attacks, didn't press close. And ammunition expenditure? High, sir. Very high. We went through standard loads plus whatever extra we could carry. Anderson's pen stopped. He looked at Rodriguez. Looked at Hayes. Extra ammunition? Explain. Silence. Nobody wanted to answer that question. Extra ammunition meant unauthorized acquisition, meant theft, meant court-martial. Anderson turned to Petrovich. Ball turret, you initiated this tactic? Yes, sir. Explain your reasoning, Petrovich described August 17th. His previous crew. Iron Annie going down because the waist gunners ran out of ammunition defending against false attacks. Described the psychology. German pilots exploited American fire discipline, used false runs to drain magazines, then pressed real attacks when gunners were dry. I figured sustained fire creates a psychological barrier, Petrovich said. Make them think your guns never stop. Make them think twice about pressing close. They don't know when you'll run dry, so they break off early rather than risk it. Anderson listened without interrupting. When Petrovich finished, Anderson asked the critical question. How much ammunition did you expend? Approximately 600 rounds, sir. Standard ball turret load is 500 rounds. Silence. Where did you acquire the additional ammunition? Petrovich looked at Hayes. Hayes looked at Anderson. The room was quiet, except for the sound of Anderson's pen tapping against his notebook. Hayes spoke. Sir, does it matter? The tactic worked. We came home. 3 other bombers didn't. Maybe if they'd had extra ammunition, they'd be here too. Anderson considered this. He'd seen the loss reports, seen the casualty lists. 27 men gone today, another 60 wounded. The numbers were brutal. If an unauthorized tactic could reduce those numbers, did regulations matter? Unauthorized modification of aircraft armament is a court-martial offense, Anderson said. And unauthorized tactics got us home alive. Anderson closed his notebook. I'll note in my report that your crew employed innovative defensive tactics with positive results. The ammunition discrepancy will not be mentioned, but this conversation never happened. Hayes nodded. Understood, sir. One more thing. Anderson looked at Petrovich. This tactic, can it be taught? Yes, sir. Any gunner can do it. Just need more ammunition and permission to fire early. Then I'm recommending it to Group Command. Anderson stood. Dismissed. At 0900 hours the next morning, the briefing room at Ridgewell was packed. All aircrew from the 381st Bomb Group, approximately 300 men, pilots, co-pilots, navigators, bombardiers, gunners, men who would fly the next mission, men who needed every advantage they could get. Colonel Harry Wilson stood at the podium, Group Commander, 42 years old. He'd flown bombers in the First World War, knew what combat looked like, knew what death looked like. Yesterday, he'd lost 3 bombers. 27 men, good men, kids, really, most under 25. Petrovich stood beside him, uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't made for public speaking, wasn't made for recognition. He was a ball turret gunner, a mechanic from Pittsburgh, not a tactician, not an innovator, just a guy who wanted his crew to survive. Wilson's voice cut through the room. Yesterday, we lost 3 bombers over Schweinfurt. 27 men didn't come home, but 1 bomber took minimal damage despite maximum fighter contact. That bomber was B-17F Lucky Strike. Their ball turret gunner did something different, something that violated doctrine, something that worked. He paused. Let the words sink in. Sergeant Petrovich, explain your tactics. Petrovich stepped forward, cleared his throat, 300 pairs of eyes watching him. He described ammunition conservation doctrine, described how Germans exploited it. False runs at 800 yards, drain American magazines, press real attacks when gunners were dry. I figured sustained fire at maximum range changes the psychology, Petrovich said. German pilots know we conserve ammunition, they count on it. But if we fire continuously, they can't count our ammunition. They don't know when we'll run dry, so they break off early rather than risk it. A gunner in the 3rd row raised his hand. What if you run out of ammunition? Better to run dry after scaring off 10 attacks than save ammunition and die on the first attack. Another question. What's the effective range for psychological intimidation? 1,000 to 1,500 yards. Close enough they see the tracers. Far enough they don't know if they'll get hit. How much ammunition do you need? More than standard load. I used 800 rounds per gun. Silence. Standard load was 500. Everyone knew that. Everyone also knew where the extra ammunition came from. Unauthorized acquisition. Theft. A pilot raised his hand. Where'd you get 300 extra rounds? Petrovich looked at Wilson. Wilson's expression didn't change. That's not relevant to this discussion, Wilson said. What's relevant is the tactic works. I'm authorizing modification of standard ammunition loads. All ball turrets will carry 800 rounds minimum. All gunners will engage at maximum effective range. This becomes 381st Bomb Group doctrine effective immediately. Another pilot stood. Sir, this contradicts 8th Air Force gunnery doctrine. Wilson's voice went cold. 8th Air Force doctrine just killed 27 of my men. We're trying something different. Any other questions? Silence. Then we're done here. Dismissed. The room emptied, gunners talking amongst themselves, calculating ammunition loads, thinking about firing early. The idea was spreading, faster than official doctrine ever spread. Because it made sense, because it worked, because men wanted to survive. Implementation was immediate. October 16th, the Armory issued 300 extra rounds per ball turret to every bomber in the 381st Bomb Group. Required slight modification to ammunition storage. Ground crews worked overnight installing larger ammunition boxes. Used the same modifications Petrovich had designed. Deeper boxes, modified feed chutes, extra weight that slowed turret rotation by 8% but tripled combat endurance. October 17th. Next mission. Cologne. 18 bombers from the 381st. Heavy fighter opposition. 40-plus German aircraft. All gunners. Employed sustained fire at maximum range. Result: 0 bombers lost from the 381st. 2 other bomb groups using standard doctrine lost 4 bombers combined. The statistical evidence was undeniable. October 1st through 14th, before sustained fire doctrine, the 381st flew 8 missions and lost 12 bombers. Loss rate: 4.2% per mission. October 15th through 31st, after sustained fire doctrine, the 381st flew 6 missions and lost 2 bombers. Loss rate: 0.9% per mission. 78% reduction in losses. Word spread through the 8th Air Force like wildfire. Other bomb groups heard about the 381st's tactics, heard about their survival rates. November. The 91st, 303rd, and 379th bomb groups adopted sustained fire. December. 15 bomb groups using modified tactics. Each group reported reduced losses. Each group burned through more ammunition but brought more bombers home. November 12th, 8th Air Force Headquarters issued Tactical Study Number 47. Sustained Defensive Fire, Analysis of Effectiveness. The study concluded that sustained fire at extended range reduced fighter effectiveness by approximately 40%. Recommended ammunition loads be increased across all bomber types. December 3rd, Official Doctrine Change. All heavy bombers authorized to carry 150% of standard ammunition loads. Gunnery training modified to emphasize sustained fire, the Germans noticed. Luftwaffe intelligence reports from November showed German pilots complaining about American continuous fire tactics. December Fighter Command issued new directives. American bomber defensive fire has increased in volume and duration. Pilots must press attacks closer before breaking off. Standard 800-yard break-off insufficient. New German doctrine: don't break until 400 yards. But pressing attacks to 400 yards meant flying through heavier defensive fire, meant taking more hits. German fighter losses increased 23% over October levels. Experienced pilots became more cautious. Newer pilots followed doctrine and died faster. Post-war interview with Luftwaffe Major Hans Philipp, captured January 1944. American bombers changed tactics in autumn 1943. Their gunners fired earlier continuously. Made it difficult to judge when they would run out of ammunition. Many pilots became hesitant to press attacks. The psychological effect was significant. By the numbers, October through December, 1,943, 67 bomber crews from multiple groups survived missions specifically attributed to sustained fire tactics. Statistical analysis by 8th Air Force showed sustained fire reduced fighter effectiveness by 38 to 42%. Ammunition expenditure increased 240%, but bomber losses decreased 34%. The mathematics was simple. More bullets, fewer casualties. More weight, more survival. More violation of original doctrine, more men coming home. Frank Petrovich completed 25 missions by December 31st, 1943, tour complete, eligible to return to the United States. He volunteered for a second tour, flew 18 additional missions between January and March 1944. Total: 43 combat missions, 6 confirmed kills, 11 probables, awarded Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Medal, with 3 oak leaf clusters. Promoted to Technical Sergeant, he never received official recognition for developing sustained fire tactics. Official credit went to tactical evolution by multiple crews. Nobody mentioned stolen ammunition. Nobody mentioned unauthorized modifications. Nobody mentioned one ball turret gunner who decided regulations mattered less than survival. Petrovich returned to Pittsburgh in May 1945. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered. He'd survived 43 combat missions, beaten odds that killed most men. He married his childhood sweetheart, Helen Kowalski, in June 1945. Small, ceremony, family and a few friends. No press, no recognition, just a quiet wedding for a quiet man. He went back to the steel mills, Jones and Laughlin Steel on the south side. Same mill where his father worked, same furnaces, same heat, same 12-hour shifts. He worked there for 37 years, retired in 1982 at age 63, 4 children, 9 grandchildren, a normal life, the kind of life 27 men from October 14th, 1943, never got to live. Petrovich never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a ball turret gunner. Did his job. Came home. If they pressed for details, he'd change the subject. Helen knew not to ask. His children grew up knowing their father had fought in the war, but knowing nothing specific. That was how most veterans handled it. The ones who survived carried their memories quietly. In 1987, military historian Dr. James McCarthy was researching the Schweinfurt raids for a book. He found reference to sustained fire tactics in 381st Bomb Group records, traced the innovation back to October 14, 1943, back to Lucky Strike, back to Staff Sergeant Frank Petrovich. McCarthy tracked Petrovich down through veteran registries, found him still living in Pittsburgh, 68 years old, still sharp, still calculating. McCarthy called him on the phone, asked if he could interview him about the sustained fire doctrine. Petrovich agreed. They met at a diner in Pittsburgh. McCarthy brought his notes. Petrovich brought his memory. "Do you realize you probably saved hundreds of lives?" McCarthy asked. Petrovich stirred his coffee. "I just wanted my crew to get home." That tactic spread across the 8th Air Force, changed how bomber defense worked for the rest of the war. "Yeah, I heard about that. Conservative estimates say 67 bomber crews survived because of sustained fire tactics. That's 603 airmen, 603 men who came home because you fired your guns early." Petrovich was quiet for a moment. 603. He'd never thought about it that way, never calculated the total impact. He'd just been trying to save 9 men, his crew, his responsibility. "I just fired my guns, Doc. Other guys did the same. They're the ones who made it work, not me." But McCarthy knew better. Innovation always started with one person, one moment, one decision to break the rules when rules didn't make sense. Petrovich had been that person. October 14, 1943, at 25,000 feet over Germany, he'd made a choice: survival over doctrine, reality over regulations. "You changed the war," McCarthy said. Petrovich shook his head. "I changed one mission. Everybody else changed the war." That was as close to recognition as Petrovich ever got. He didn't want statues or medals. Didn't want his name in history books. He'd done what needed doing. 9 men had survived. That was enough. Frank Petrovich died March 3, 1998. He was 79 years old. He stood at the edge of his field, the evening sky streaked with contrails fading into gold. The wind carried the faint hum of a distant jet, smooth, effortless, alive. For a moment, he closed his eyes and heard the old engines again, the hiss of oxygen, the breath between life and fire. A quiet smile crossed his face. The world had learned to fly without burning. His work was finished. As the light dimmed, he whispered to no one in particular, "Goodbye, and breathe easy, up there."